I walked into that office with a pen in my hand and nothing left to fight for. My sister Cassie sat across the table, her lawyer beside her, my mother Diane at the head, all of them watching me the way people watch someone about to step off a ledge. Cooperative. Finally, the notary, a quiet man named Harold Chen, set the document in front of me. I uncapped my pen. Then he looked up. "Ms. Lawson," he said, "before you sign, I need you to wait." Cassie's smile didn't disappear. It just stopped moving. What none of them knew was that my father had already decided how this would end. The papers they needed me to sign that morning, the trust they had spent 4 months convincing me to walk away from, it had been in my name for over a year. Before I continue, tell me in the comments where you are watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you have ever been asked to give up something that was already yours. My name is Jenna Lawson. I am 32 years old, and until 14 months ago, I believed that if you were quiet enough, patient enough, and good enough, the people who were supposed to love you would eventually see it. I was wrong, but I am getting ahead of myself. I grew up in Greenwich, Connecticut, in a house with 11 bedrooms, a circular driveway, and a mother who kept a seating chart for Thanksgiving. The Lawson name meant something in that town. Old money, the kind that does not announce itself. My father, Robert Lawson, had built a regional investment firm from a single office in Stamford into something that managed close to $60 million in client assets. He was methodical, precise, and deeply private. He did not talk about money at the dinner table. He did not talk about the firm at the dinner table. What he talked about mostly was Cassandra. Cassie was 4 years younger than me and had been the center of our household's gravity for as long as I could remember. She was the one my mother dressed carefully for school photographs. She was the one my father introduced first at firm dinners. Not because she was smarter or kinder. I say that without bitterness, just accuracy, but because she had a quality I never quite possessed. She filled a room. She laughed at the right moments. She knew how to make powerful people feel seen. My mother called it charm. My father called it a gift. I called it something I had stopped trying to compete with by the time I was 15. I was the other one, the older one, the one who got straight A's and was told warmly that it was expected. I left for Yale at 18 and did not look back the way I probably should have. I went straight through to law school, passed the bar in Connecticut, New York, and Massachusetts in the same year, and joined a mid-size firm in Hartford that specialized in estate planning and probate litigation. It was not glamorous work. Most people's eyes glazed over when I explained what I did. But I understood it in a way that felt almost physical. The architecture of how families pass things down, the places where love and money tangle, and where the law has to step in and sort through the wreckage. I was good at it. Quietly, steadily good. I had settled estates worth north of $20 million. I had caught 3 cases of undue influence that the families themselves had not recognized. I knew how to read a trust document the way other people read a text message, fast, instinctively, catching the tone underneath the words. My family did not know this about me in any real way. They knew I was a lawyer. They understood it the way you understand a relative who works in a field you've never needed. Abstractly, distantly. My father was the exception. Robert Lawson had started calling me every Sunday at 7 in the evening, about 3 years before he died. Not long calls, 15-20 minutes. He asked about my cases without asking for details. He asked if I was eating. He asked, once, whether I thought a person could know they were being taken advantage of and still allow it to happen out of habit. I told him yes. I told him I saw it in my work more than almost anything else. He was quiet for a moment and then said, "That's a hard thing to watch." I did not know then that he was talking about himself. Cassie, in those same years, had moved back to Greenwich. She had tried 2 different careers, event planning, then interior design, and settled into a version of adulthood that revolved around my mother's social calendar and my father's credit line. She was not lazy, exactly. She was comfortable. There is a difference, though it can be hard to see from the inside. My mother, Diane, had married my father at 24 and organized her entire identity around his success and Cassie's potential. She was gracious at parties, she was precise about appearances, and she had decided somewhere along the way that the Lawson estate would pass through Cassie because Cassie was the one who stayed. Cassie was the one who needed it. I had my career, I had my independence, I had, in my mother's framing, already received my inheritance in the form of opportunity. She never said this directly. She did not have to. The Sunday calls with my father stopped 8 months before he died. He had been diagnosed with a progressive heart condition the previous winter, and by spring, he was tired in a way the phone could not hide. Our last real conversation was in April. He told me he was proud of me. He said it plainly, without preamble, the way he said things when he meant them most. I thanked him. I told him I loved him. I did not cry until after I hung up, standing in the parking garage of my office building in Hartford with my hand flat against the concrete wall. He passed in October, quietly at home with Diane beside him. I drove down for the funeral. I stayed 4 days. I helped with arrangements, answered the door when neighbors came, and kept my mouth shut when Cassie told 3 separate people that she had been his primary caretaker, which was not entirely true, but was not entirely false either. I was not going to fight about it. Not then. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 weeks after the funeral, at the offices of my father's longtime attorney, a man named Gerald Fitch, in downtown Greenwich. I wore a gray blazer. I brought nothing with me, no notepad, no folder. I did not expect to need them. I should have known something was wrong when Gerald would not meet my eyes. Gerald Fitch had been my father's attorney for 22 years. I knew this because my father had mentioned him the way you mention someone reliable. Not warmly, not with particular affection, but with the steady confidence of a man who has found a professional he trusts and stopped looking. Gerald handled the firm's legal housekeeping, the property transfers, the annual trust reviews. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired, with the careful posture of someone who had spent decades being the most composed person in difficult rooms. He was not composed that morning. The conference room at Fitch & Associates was on the 4th floor of a brownstone on Main Street, with tall windows that looked out over the town green. There was a long table, 8 chairs, a pitcher of water nobody touched. Diane arrived first and sat at the head, not Gerald's usual seat, but no one corrected her. Cassie came in 2 minutes later in a black dress that was slightly too polished for a probate meeting, her hair done, a small smile already arranged on her face. 2 men I did not recognize sat against the wall with legal pads. Gerald's associate, a young woman named Priya, took a seat near the door. I sat across from Cassie. Gerald came in last, set a folder on the table, and adjusted his glasses twice before he spoke. He welcomed everyone. He offered condolences. He noted that the document he was about to read represented the final valid will of Robert Arthur Lawson. Executed 14 months prior, 14 months. I registered that number without reacting. He read the preamble in the flat, careful cadence of a man reciting something he has rehearsed. The firm assets, already in a separate business trust, would be liquidated over 18 months and the proceeds absorbed into the family estate. The Greenwich property, the house I had grown up in, 4 acres on Round Hill Road, assessed at $2.3 million, would transfer to Diane for her lifetime, then to Cassandra upon Diane's passing. The investment trust, which my father had built over 30 years, and which held approximately $4.2 million in diversified assets, would pass in full to Cassandra, with Diane named as co-trustee, until Cassie reached 35. Gerald paused. To his elder daughter, Jennifer Ann Lawson, he read, a cash bequest of $85,000 in recognition of her independence and professional achievement. The room was silent, $85,000, against $4.2 million and a $2.3 million property. Framed, specifically, as recognition of the fact that I had built a life without needing them. I sat very still. Cassie looked at her hands. She had the decency, or perhaps just the strategy, not to smile. Diane looked at me. Her expression was composed, faintly sympathetic, the way a person looks when they have prepared themselves for your reaction and decided in advance that it is manageable. She said, before anyone else could speak, your father and I discussed this at length, Jenna. We agreed it was best. You always had your career. You never needed the way Cassie did. I noticed, she said. We agreed. Present tense memory of a dead man's wishes, reshaped into consensus. I looked at Gerald. He was writing something on the top of his folder, not looking up. I thought about 5 things simultaneously, the way lawyers do when something lands wrong. I thought about the phrase, final valid will. I thought about the 14-month execution date. I thought about the Sunday calls, the last real conversation. My father's voice saying, I'm proud of you, without any of the qualifications he usually attached to everything. I thought about the question he had asked me, whether a person could know they were being taken advantage of and still allow it out of habit. And I thought, he knew, but I said none of this. I picked up the pen Gerald slid toward me to acknowledge receipt of the summary document, a formality, not a signature on anything binding. and I wrote my name in the small box at the bottom of the page. "Thank you," I said to Gerald. He nodded without looking up. I stood. I buttoned my blazer. I said goodbye to no one in particular and walked out through the lobby and down the 4 flights of stairs rather than wait for the elevator, because I needed the 30 seconds of movement to keep my face exactly where I had put it. Outside, the October air was cold and flat. I stood on the sidewalk on Mason Street and I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I stood there for probably 90 seconds, watching a woman walk a golden retriever past the town green, and I thought very clearly, something is wrong with that document, not emotionally wrong. Legally wrong. My father was meticulous. He had spent 30 years building an estate with the care of someone who understood that the wrong word in the wrong clause could unravel a decade of planning. He would not have written a will that framed my exclusion as a compliment. He would not have used the phrase in recognition of her independence. That was not how he thought. That was not how he wrote. That language had been put there by someone else. I did not have proof of that yet. I had only the instinct of someone who had spent 8 years reading these documents, the grain of the wood, the texture of intent, and my instinct said, this is not his voice. I drove back to Hartford. I did not call Diane. I did not call Cassie. I went to my office, sat at my desk until 8 in the evening, and began pulling everything I knew about Robert Lawson's estate from memory, looking for the seam where something had been changed. I did not find it that night, but I knew it was there. I gave myself 1 week to grieve, and then I stopped. Not because the grief was finished, it wasn't, and I knew it wouldn't be for a long time, but because grief and clarity cannot occupy the same space at the same time, and I needed to be clear. I had learned this from probate work. The families who fell apart during estate disputes were not the ones who cried the most. They were the ones who could not separate what they felt from what they needed to see. I had watched it happen to other people for 8 years. I was not going to let it happen to me. I went back to work. I took 3 new client consultations. I reviewed 2 trust amendments for existing clients and caught a drafting error in one that would have exposed the estate to unnecessary tax liability. I cooked dinner at home 4 nights that week instead of ordering in. I called my friend Margot on Thursday and told her the broad outline of what had happened. And she said what good friends say, which was that it was wrong and that my father would not have wanted it, and that I deserved better. I thanked her and changed the subject. What I did not tell Margot, what I did not tell anyone, was that I had started a file. It lived on my personal laptop, not my work machine. A simple folder. Inside it, I had typed out every detail I could remember from the reading. Gerald's exact phrasing, the execution date of the will, the specific language around my bequest, the 2 men against the wall whose names I had not been given, the way Gerald had adjusted his glasses twice before he started reading. Details that meant nothing individually. Details I was not ready to discard. The letter arrived on a Friday 17 days after the reading. It came in a standard white envelope with no return address, forwarded through my firm's mailroom from my old Greenwich address. I had updated my address with the post office, but apparently not with everyone who had ever known my father. The handwriting on the front was not my father's. It was careful, slightly formal, the handwriting of someone older who had learned penmanship before typing replaced it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead. Jenna, your father asked me to send this to you after the reading. He said you would know what it meant. I am sorry for your loss. He was a good man. HC. Beneath that note was a smaller folded piece of paper, and inside that, in my father's handwriting, unmistakably, the particular slant of his capital letters, the way he always pressed slightly too hard with a pen, were 11 words. Jenna, do not sign anything until you speak to Mr. Harold Chen. That was all. No explanation. No address. No context for who Harold Chen was, or why I should find him, or what he would tell me when I did. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time with that piece of paper in my hand. Then I opened my laptop and searched for Harold Chen. Notary Public, Connecticut. There were 4 results. 3 were in the wrong part of the state. The 4th was a small notarial services office in Westport, 20 minutes from Greenwich, with a 1-page website that listed hours, services, and a phone number. No photograph. No biography beyond a single line. Serving Fairfield County for over 30 years. I called the number the next morning. A man answered on the second ring, quiet and unhurried. And when I told him my name, he said, Ms. Lawson, I have been expecting you to call. Can you come in on Tuesday? I said yes before I had checked my calendar. I told no one. Driving to Westport that Tuesday, I kept my speed exactly at the limit, which is something I only do when I am trying to manage something I cannot fully see yet. Harold Chen's office was on the second floor of a small professional building near the Westport train station above an insurance agency. The waiting room had 2 chairs, a rubber plant that had seen better years, and a frosted glass door with his name stenciled on it in gold letters. The whole place smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the specific smell of an office where serious, quiet work has been done for a very long time. Harold Chen was in his early 70s. Small, precise, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and the particular stillness of a man who had spent his career being the most discreet person in every room he entered. He shook my hand and gestured to the chair across from his desk, without any preamble. "Your father came to see me 11 months before he passed," he said. "He came alone. He told me he had reason to believe that changes were being made to his estate planning without his full understanding, and that he wanted to create a document outside the usual channels. He was very specific about that, outside the usual channels. He did not trust his existing attorney for this particular matter." I kept my face still. "He executed a codicil in my office," Harold continued, "witnessed by 2 individuals he brought with him, retired colleagues of his, both of legal age and sound mind, neither of them related to the family. The document was notarized by me personally. It has been in my care since that day, sealed, per your father's instructions, until after the reading of the primary will." He opened his desk drawer and set a sealed envelope on the table between us, my father's handwriting on the front. "My name," he said. "You would understand what it contained," Harold said. He said, and I am quoting him directly, "She'll know what to do with it. She does this for a living." I picked up the envelope. My hands were steady. I am proud of that, still. Inside was a 4-page document, properly formatted, legally captioned, bearing my father's signature across the bottom of each page, and the notarial seal of Harold Chen. A codicil to the last will and testament of Robert Arthur Lawson. Executed 11 months before his death. I read it twice. Then I set it down on Harold's desk and looked out his window at the train station below, where a commuter train was just pulling away from the platform. My father had known. He had known what was coming, and he had built a door that only I could walk through, and he had been waiting, quietly, for me to find it. I did not cry in Harold Chen's office. I saved that for the drive home, somewhere on Route 1 with the heat running and the radio off, the gray November sky sitting flat and low over the Connecticut shoreline. But there was something underneath the grief that had not been there before. Something that felt, for the first time in weeks, like ground beneath my feet. I did not open the codicil again that night. I drove home, made tea I did not drink, and sat at my kitchen table with the sealed envelope in front of me until almost midnight. Not because I was afraid of what was inside. I had already read it twice in Harold's office, absorbed the structure, understood the legal weight of it. But because I knew that once I began to work with it, something would shift permanently. The version of this situation where I could still walk away, accept the $85,000, and rebuild my life quietly in Hartford. That version would close, and I wanted to sit with it for one more night before I let it go. In the morning, I opened the document again at my kitchen table with coffee and a yellow legal pad. My father had written the codicil himself. In the first instance, the language was his, unmistakably, the same precise cadence of his Sunday phone calls, the same habits of thought I recognized from years of listening to him reason through problems out loud. Harold Chen's office had formatted it properly, added the legal captions, ensured the execution requirements were met. But the intent, the architecture of it, that was Robert Lawson. The codicil did 3 things. First, it amended the distribution of the primary investment trust. Instead of passing in full to Cassandra, the trust, all $4.2 million of it, was to be divided equally, 50% to Cassandra and 50% to Jenna, with neither Diane nor Gerald Fitch named as trustees. Instead, my father had appointed a corporate trustee, a fiduciary services firm in Stamford that he had used for a client matter years earlier, and trusted for exactly that reason. They had no relationship with Diane. Second, it transferred the Greenwich property, the Round Hill Roadhouse, all 4 acres, directly to me upon his death, bypassing Diane's lifetime interest entirely. There was a note in the margin of this section, in my father's handwriting, that Harold confirmed was present on the original. "She will take care of it, she always has." Third, and this was the part I read 4 times before I fully processed it, the codicil contained a no-contest clause with a specific trigger. If any party attempted to suppress, contest, or fail to disclose this codicil during probate, their interest under both the primary will and the codicil would be automatically forfeited. The clause was tight, well constructed, the kind of language that does not leave much room for argument. My father had clearly had help thinking it through, or had done considerable research on his own, because it was not the work of a layman guessing at legal structure, it was the work of a man who knew someone might try to hide what he was doing. I set the legal pad down and looked at the ceiling for a while. Gerald Fitch had conducted the reading of the primary will knowing, or he should have known, in his capacity as a state attorney, that a codicil might exist. Standard practice in probate requires a diligent search for all testamentary documents. The execution date on the codicil was 11 months before my father's death. Gerald had represented my father for 22 years. The question of whether Gerald had known about the codicil and suppressed it, or had simply failed in his professional duty to search for it, was a question I could not answer yet, but it was a question I was going to answer. I called a colleague that morning. Her name was Patricia Osei, Pat, a litigation partner at a firm in New Haven, who specialized in exactly the intersection I was now standing in: probate fraud and fiduciary misconduct. We had met at a continuing education seminar 4 years earlier and had since referred cases to each other twice. She was methodical, tenacious, and had the particular quality of someone who became calmer the more serious a situation became. I told her the outline. I did not send the document yet. I wanted to meet in person. She was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "How solid is the notarization?" "Harold Chen has been a notary in Fairfield County for over 30 years, I said. "The witnesses are two retired businessmen with no family connection. The execution formalities are correct. The document is clean." Another pause. "Jenna," she said, "if this codicil is what you're describing, and if it can be shown that the primary will was presented with knowledge that this document existed, that's not just a probate dispute. That's fraud on the court." "I know," I said. "When can you come to New Haven?" I was in her office by 2 o'clock that afternoon. Pat reviewed the codicil for 40 minutes without speaking. I sat across from her and watched her read, tracking which sections made her slow down, which made her go back. When she finished, she set the document on her desk, aligned its edges carefully, and looked at me. "Your father was protecting you," she said. "It was not a question. He figured out what was happening," I said. "Late, maybe too late to redo the whole will without Diane finding out and challenging his capacity. So he went around it." Pat nodded slowly. "The codicil is valid on its face, properly executed, properly witnessed, properly notarized. To challenge it, they would have to argue lack of capacity or undue influence on the codicil itself, and they'd be arguing that the man who left the primary will intact was simultaneously incapable of executing a 4-page amendment. That's a hard case to make. They don't know it exists yet," I said. Pat looked at me carefully. "Are you sure?" I thought about Gerald's eyes sliding away from mine at the reading. I thought about the two men against the wall, with legal pads whose names I had never been given. I thought about the specific phrasing of my bequest, in recognition of her independence. "No," I said, "I'm not sure at all." That was the moment the thing I had been calling instinct sharpened into something harder and more specific. Not a feeling, a direction. I did not call Diane that night. I did not call Cassie. I went home and I added to my file, and for the first time since the reading I slept without waking at 3 in the morning with my father's voice in my head, saying 11 words I had finally learned to hear correctly. "She'll know what to do with it. She does this for a living." "Yes, Dad, I do." The call from Diane came on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after my visit to Pat's office. I was at my desk reviewing a client trust amendment when my phone lit up with her name. I looked at it for 2 full rings before I answered, not because I was nervous, because I wanted to be ready, Jenna. Her voice was warm in the particular way it became warm when she needed something. Measured, slightly softened at the edges, the tone she used at charity luncheons when she was working Cameroon. "I've been meaning to reach out. I know this has been a difficult time for all of us." "It has," I said. "I wanted to see how you were doing, and there is something I'd like to discuss, in person if possible. Cassie will be here as well. We thought it might be good for the 3 of us to sit down together. Close things out properly, close things out." I wrote those 3 words on my legal pad and underlined them. "Of course," I said. "When were you thinking?" "We settled on Saturday. Lunch at the Round Hill Roadhouse. My father's house. The house I had grown up in. The house that the primary will had given to Diane for her lifetime, and then to Cassie. I drove down from Hartford on a gray December morning with the heat on and the radio off, the same way I had driven to Westport 6 weeks earlier. I had not told Pat I was going. I had not told anyone. I wanted to see what they put on the table before I decided what to show them. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the way childhood places always do when you return to them as an adult, carrying something heavy. The hydrangeas along the front walk had been cut back for winter. My father's car was gone from the driveway, replaced by Cassie's white Range Rover. I sat in my car for a moment and looked at the front door and thought about the last time I had walked through it while my father was alive. And then I got out. Deanne had set the dining room table with the good china. That detail told me everything I needed to know about how she had framed this meeting in her own mind. This was a performance of graciousness. This was her showing me that she was being civilized, generous even, by inviting me to the table at all. Cassie was already seated when I came in, a glass of sparkling water in front of her, her phone face down on the table. She stood to hug me, briefly, the kind of hug that communicates obligation rather than warmth. She smelled expensive. She looked tired in a way she was trying to hide. We ate lunch: roasted chicken, winter vegetables, a bread basket nobody touched. Diane talked about the house, about some renovations she was considering, about a charity gala she was co-chairing in the spring. I asked appropriate questions. Cassie contributed occasionally. The whole meal had the texture of a dress rehearsal for a conversation nobody wanted to start. Then Diane set down her fork and folded her hands on the table. "There is a document we need you to look at," she said. "Gerald prepared it. It's straightforward. Just a formal acknowledgement that you've received your bequest and that the estate distribution is settled. It closes out the file on your father's side." She slid a folder across the table. I opened it. The document inside was 4 pages, dense with legal formatting, bearing Gerald Fitch's firm name across the top. I read the first page at normal speed and then slowed down on the second. It was not a simple receipt acknowledgement. It was a comprehensive release and waiver of claims. A document that, if signed, would permanently and irrevocably extinguish any legal right I had to contest, challenge, or seek additional distribution from my father's estate. It covered not just the primary will but any and all testamentary documents, amendments, codicils, or related instruments. The language was specific. The word codicil appeared twice in the 3rd paragraph, buried inside a list of items I would be releasing claims to. My father had been right to warn me. I read to the end of the 4th page. Then I closed the folder and set it on the table in front of me and looked at Diane. "You already got your $85,000, Jenna," Cassie said. Her voice was careful but impatient, the voice of someone who has been waiting for a difficult conversation to be finished. "This is just paperwork. It closes the estate. Stop making this harder than it needs to be." I looked at her for a moment. She held my gaze for about 3 seconds before she looked at her water glass. "I'd like to take this home and review it," I said. Diane's expression shifted. Barely, the way a mask shifts when the person behind it adjusts their grip. "It's standard language, Jenna. Gerald explained it to us. It's what everyone signs." "I'm a licensed estate attorney," I said pleasantly. "I always review documents before I sign them. I'm sure Gerald would expect nothing less." A silence settled over the table. I folded the document back into the folder, picked it up, and set it in my bag. Diane opened her mouth and then closed it again. Cassie was looking at the breadbasket. "I'll be in touch," I said. I drove home with the folder on the passenger seat and did not touch it until I was inside my apartment with the door locked and my coat still on. Then, I sat at the kitchen table and read it again from the beginning, slowly, the way I read documents for clients, looking not just at what was there but at what the language was designed to prevent. The word codicil, buried in paragraph 3. They knew, not suspected. Knew, or knew enough to be afraid of it. Because you do not draft a release that specifically extinguishes rights under any and all codicils unless someone has told you there might be a codicil to worry about. That language does not appear in a standard estate receipt. A first-year law student would know that Gerald Fitch had put it there on purpose. I called Pat that evening and told her about the document. She was quiet for a long moment and then said, in the flat tone she used when things became serious, "Send me a copy tonight. Don't sign anything. Don't respond to them yet, I know," I said. Jenna, a pause. "This just became a different kind of case." "I know that too," I said. I hung up and stood at my kitchen window for a while, looking out at the Hartford skyline in the December dark. Somewhere in Greenwich, Diane was probably calling Gerald. Cassie was probably deciding what to wear to something. and neither of them had any idea that the document they had just shown me, the one designed to make me disappear quietly, had just handed me exactly what I needed to show that they knew the codicil existed and had chosen to hide it. I did not feel triumphant. Not yet. What I felt was the particular steadiness that comes when a case you have been building in the dark finally finds its first solid footing. I went to bed at 11. I slept all the way through. I did not respond to Diane for 11 days. Not out of spite. I am not built for spite. It requires too much energy that I prefer to spend on other things. But because Pat and I had work to do, and because silence, in a situation like this one, is its own kind of information, I wanted to see what they would do with it. What they did was talk. The first indication came from my cousin Miriam, who called me on a Sunday in mid-December with the careful voice of someone delivering news they find uncomfortable. Miriam was Diane's niece by marriage, reliably kind, and had always occupied the Switzerland position in our family's geography. Neutral, observant, unwilling to take sides but also unwilling to pretend she had not noticed things. She told me that at a family dinner the previous Thursday, Diane had described the estate situation as complicated by Jenna's reluctance to cooperate. Cassie had told the table that I was being advised by outside lawyers who were trying to manufacture a dispute where there isn't one. Her phrase, apparently, was that I was dragging Dad's memory through the mud for money I was never meant to have. I thanked Miriam. I told her I appreciated her telling me. I did not say anything else about it. 2 days later, a woman I had known slightly through the Hartford legal community, a real estate attorney named Donna Phelps, who moved in some of the same professional circles as Gerald Fitch, mentioned to a mutual colleague that she had heard I was going through a difficult time with my family, and that she hoped I would find some peace. The way it was relayed to me suggested it had not been framed as sympathy. It had been framed as a warning. This was Diane's network activating. The quiet, efficient social pressure of a woman who had spent 40 years building relationships precisely for moments like this one. I filed it all. I added it to the document on my laptop with dates and sources, the way I would for a client. Then, on a Friday evening, my phone rang with a number I did not recognize. I let it go to voicemail. The message was from a detective with the Greenwich Police Department, a Sergeant Millis, who said he was following up on a complaint filed by Diane Lawson regarding a disputed inheritance matter and asked me to call him back at my earliest convenience. I sat with that voicemail for a long time. Then I called Pat. She picked up on the first ring. I read her the voicemail text I had typed out while listening to it. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "They filed a complaint with the police about a civil probate matter." That's what it sounds like, Jenna. There is no criminal dimension to a disputed will. A probate contest is a civil proceeding. The police have no jurisdiction here, unless they're alleging you've committed an actual crime. I know that. So what they're doing, Pat said carefully, is applying pressure. They want you to feel like you're on the wrong side of something official. They want you to call a detective and feel like a suspect, and sign the release to make it stop. I understood that. I understood it clearly, and yet understanding something clearly does not entirely remove the feeling that lands in your chest when you your law enforcement officer's name attached to your own. I had spent 8 years on the right side of legal proceedings. The sensation of being cast, even falsely on the wrong side of one, was unpleasant in a way I had not anticipated. I did not call Sergeant Millis back that evening. I called Pat's recommended criminal defense contact, a brief consultation to confirm what we both already knew. There was nothing here. No crime had been alleged, no warrant issued, nothing actionable. The complaint was almost certainly a civil nuisance filing, designed to generate a paper trail that made me look difficult, but I saved the voicemail. I saved it in 3 places. Meanwhile, Pat and I had been building something. In the 3 weeks since I had brought her the release document, she had been conducting a quiet, methodical review of the estate records available through public filing. Connecticut probate is a public process. Most documents file with the court, and a licensed attorney with the right access and patience can learn a great deal from what is and is not there. What Pat found was this. Gerald Fitch had filed a certificate of diligent search for testamentary documents as part of the probate opening. The certificate stated, under penalty of perjury, that a thorough search had been conducted and that no documents other than the primary will had been located. Harold Chen's office was 11 miles from Gerald Fitch's office. Harold Chen had been a licensed notary in Fairfield County for 31 years. Gerald Fitch had represented my father for 22 years. I am not saying Gerald knew Harold by name. I am saying that a diligent search conducted by a competent estate attorney of 22 years standing for the testamentary documents of a client he had served for over 2 decades should have, at minimum, involved asking the client's family members whether they were aware of any other documents. It should have involved a search of Connecticut's notarial records. It should have involved basic due diligence that a first-year associate would know to conduct. Whether Gerald had failed in his professional duty or had actively chosen not to look, that was the question. And the release document, with its specific codicil language buried in paragraph 3, was beginning to suggest an answer. Pat also found something else. In the public court filing, among the initial probate inventory, there was a line item for a storage unit rented in my father's name in Westport, the same town as Harold Chen's office. The unit had been emptied by Diane in the 2 weeks following my father's death, before the probate estate was formally opened. The inventory listed the contents as personal effects, no significant financial value. Pat had pulled the rental records through a subpoena request tied to the estate proceedings, and among the access logs was a single entry. Robert Lawson. 6 months before his death, visiting the unit alone, we did not know what he had stored there. Diane had already cleared it, but I thought I knew. I thought he had kept copies of the codicil, copies of whatever research or documentation had led him to create it in the first place, and Diane had gotten there first. I added this to the file and said nothing to anyone outside Pat's office. The last thing that happened in that month of December was the quietest and, in some ways, the most important. I drove to Westport on a Tuesday afternoon and sat in Harold Chen's office for an hour. Not to review the codicil again, I had it memorized, but to ask Harold a question I had been turning over since the first visit. When my father came to you, I said, "Did he tell you why he didn't go through Gerald Fitch?" Harold folded his hands on his desk. He was quiet for a moment, the way he was quiet about everything. Not withholding, just precise. He said he had discovered that certain conversations about his estate were occurring without his knowledge. Harold said. He said he did not know how far it went. He said he wanted to create something that no one in his existing circle would know about. Did he seem frightened? Harold considered this. He said carefully, like a man who had decided to stop being surprised and start being prepared. I drove home in the early dark of December, the highway lights blurring slightly through a windshield that needed cleaning. I thought about my father sitting across from Harold Chen in that small office above the insurance agency, doing the quiet, careful work of protecting his eldest daughter from people who had been standing in the same room with him for decades. I thought about how lonely that must have been, and I thought, not much longer now. The letter from Gerald Fitch's office arrived on a Tuesday in early January. It came by certified mail, which meant I had to sign for it, which meant it was designed to feel official and weighty and unavoidable. I signed. I brought it inside. I made coffee before I opened it, because I had learned over the years that the best way to read an adversarial document is to be slightly bored when you do it. Boredom keeps the emotional temperature down and the analytical temperature up. The letter was 4 pages, on Fitch and Associates letterhead, addressed to me personally rather than to any legal representative. That was the first thing I noted. They did not know I had retained Pat. They thought they were still dealing with me alone. The letter opened with 2 paragraphs of legal throat clearing about the finality of probate proceedings and the importance of timely estate closure. Then it moved, on page 2, into what it actually was: a formal demand that I execute the release document within 30 days, or face litigation to compel compliance, on the grounds that my refusal to sign constituted an obstruction of the orderly administration of my father's estate. There was a section on page 3 that made me set down my coffee cup. It read, in part, that the estate had been administered in full accordance with the valid and controlling testamentary instrument of Robert Arthur Lawson, and that any claims arising from purported secondary documents of uncertain provenance and validity would be vigorously contested. The phrase purported secondary documents appeared twice. The phrase uncertain provenance appeared once. They knew about the codicil. Not suspected, not feared, knew, specifically, with enough detail to have run their own preliminary assessment of it, and decided to characterize it preemptively as uncertain provenance before I had shown it to anyone, which meant someone had told them. which meant either Harold Chen had been contacted, which I did not believe for a moment, based on everything I knew of the man, or my father's storage unit in Westport had contained more than personal effects. I called Pat before I finished reading the letter. She arrived at my apartment that evening, with her laptop and a yellow legal pad, and read the letter twice while I made dinner. Neither of us ate. When she finished, she set it on the kitchen table and looked at me with the flat, focused expression I had come to recognize as her version of excitement. "They just made a serious mistake," she said. "The provenance language," I said. "They have characterized a document they claim not to have seen as being of uncertain provenance. You cannot assess the provenance of a document you don't know exists, which means they've seen it, or a copy of it, or someone has described it to them in enough detail to draft around it." Pat nodded. "Which means the certificate of diligent search Gerald filed with the probate court. The one swearing, under penalty of perjury, that no other testamentary documents were located, was filed with knowledge that this document existed." The word perjury sat between us for a moment. "We need to move carefully," Pat said, "but we need to move." What followed was the most methodical 3 weeks of work I had done since passing the bar. Pat filed a formal motion with the probate court to reopen the estate proceedings based on newly discovered testamentary evidence. The codicil, submitted in full with Harold Chen's notarial records and the contact information for both witnesses. I prepared a detailed affidavit documenting the timeline: the letter from Harold, the meeting, the review of the document, the release demand with its buried codicil language, and now the Fitch letter with its preemptive characterization of a document they claimed not to have seen. Harold Chen submitted his own affidavit, sworn and notarized, attesting to the circumstances of the codicil's execution, the identity of the witnesses, and the fact that he had not been contacted by Gerald Fitch or anyone from his office during the estate's administration. Despite being listed in the Connecticut Notarial Registry, despite practicing 11 miles from Fitch's office for over 30 years. The two witnesses, retired businessmen named Arthur Kemp and Donald Sato, both in their late 60s, both with clean records and no financial interest in the estate, provided sworn statements confirming they had witnessed Robert Lawson execute the codicil in full possession of his faculties, with no sign of confusion or coercion. We filed everything on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, Gerald Fitch had retained outside counsel. That detail reached me through Pat, who had a contact at the courthouse. An estate attorney retaining outside counsel in a probate reopening proceeding is not standard. It is the move of someone who understands that the proceeding is no longer just about the estate. But the thing that broke the case open, the thing I had not engineered, had not planned for, had not seen coming, happened on a Saturday. Cassie called me. She called at 9 in the morning, which was unusual because Cassie did not make early calls. Her voice was tight in a way I had never heard from her before. Not angry, not cold, but compressed, like something under pressure that had been held too long. "I need to know something," she said without greeting me. "Did Dad leave you something separate?" "Something outside the will." I was quiet for exactly the right amount of time, long enough to be thoughtful, short enough not to seem evasive. "Why are you asking me that, Cassie?" A pause. "Because Gerald told Mom there might be a document. He told her 6 weeks before Dad died. He said he'd looked into it and it probably wasn't valid, and that if we just handled things quickly after, if we moved fast on the estate, it would be easier to manage." The kitchen was very quiet, Cassie. I said carefully. "I need you to think about what you just told me." Another pause, longer this time. Gerald knew. Her voice had changed, flatter now, something moving behind it that might have been the beginning of understanding what she had been part of. "He knew before Dad died." "Yes," I said. "Mom knew he knew?" I did not answer that directly. "I think I said that you should talk to your own lawyer, not Gerald. Someone who represents only you." She hung up without saying goodbye. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call. I was not thinking about Cassie, not exactly. I was thinking about my father, sitting in Harold Chen's office with his two retired friends, signing his name across the bottom of 4 pages, pressing slightly too hard with the pen the way he always did, building the door, waiting for me to find it. He had known Gerald would try to manage it. He had known Diane would move quickly. He had known that by the time I walked into that probate reading, the primary will would already be positioned as the only document that mattered. What he had also known, what he had trusted, specifically, without needing to explain it to me, was that I would read the language of that bequest and hear the wrong note in it. That I would know his voice well enough to know when someone else's words had been put in its place. That I would not sign anything I had not read, that I would find Harold Chen and understand immediately what he had done and why. He had not left me a fortune in secret. He had left me a key, and Cassie had just, without knowing it, handed me the lock it opened. I called Pat and told her about the call. She was silent for a moment. Did she record it? I don't know. It doesn't matter. Pat said. You didn't make any admissions. But what she told you. Gerald advising the family to move fast before the codicil could surface. That's exactly the intent evidence we needed. If she'll testify to that, she might, I said. She's scared. Good, Pat said quietly. Scared people tell the truth. I hung up and looked at the folder on my kitchen table, the one that had been growing for months. Page by careful page, the way my father had built his firm, the way he had built everything, methodically, without drama, one solid thing at a time. It was almost ready. The Lawson Family Foundation Gala had been held every February for 19 years. My father had started it the year I turned 13, a fundraiser for the Greenwich Literacy Coalition. Black tie, 200 guests, held in the ballroom of the Delamar Hotel on the harbor. It had grown over the years into one of the more significant evenings on the Greenwich social calendar. My father had chaired it for 16 of those 19 years. The year he was too ill to attend, he had sent a handwritten note to every table. The year he died, Diane had announced, at the October funeral reception, that the gala would continue in his memory and that she and Cassie would accept the Lawson Family Legacy Award on his behalf at the February event. I had not been invited to help plan it. I had not been mentioned in the program. Pat and I had filed our motion to reopen the estate in mid-January. The probate court had acknowledged receipt and assigned a hearing date in late March. Gerald Fitch's outside counsel had responded with a preliminary objection, dense and procedurally aggressive, designed to slow things down and run up costs. It was the response of people who believed they could outlast me. They had miscalculated the timeline because Harold Chen, when he had submitted his affidavit, had also submitted something else. Something Pat and I had not asked for, but which he had included on his own initiative, with a quiet thoroughness that reminded me of my father. He had submitted his notarial journal entry from the day of the codicil's execution. Date, time, the names of both witnesses, a physical description of my father, noting his sound mind and voluntary execution of the document. Standard practice for a careful notary, in Connecticut. A notarial journal is a legal record. It is contemporaneous documentation. It is, in a courtroom, very difficult to argue against. When Gerald's outside counsel saw the journal entry, they filed a motion requesting a 60-day extension to review newly submitted evidence. The probate court denied it. Pat called me with the denial on a Thursday afternoon 2 weeks before the gala. Her voice was measured, but I had known her long enough to hear the current running underneath it. The hearing is still March, she said, but I've had a conversation with the court's appointed fiduciary examiner. Given the nature of the evidence, the notarial journal, the witness affidavits, Cassie's informal disclosure about Gerald's pre-death knowledge, they've flagged this for potential referral to the state's attorney's office. For Gerald, and potentially others depending on what the examination finds. A pause. Jenna, I think we should consider whether to make a move before the hearing. Something public, on the record, that establishes the timeline clearly and makes it harder for anyone to reframe this as a family squabble after the fact. I thought about that for a moment. The gala is in 2 weeks, I said. Pat was quiet. 200 guests, I said, half of Greenwich. Every person my father built his reputation with over 40 years. The board of the Literacy Coalition, his former business partners, people who knew him, Jenna. Harold Chen will come if I ask him, I said. He told me as much at our last meeting. He said your father would want this handled properly and publicly. His words, another pause. If we do this, we do it correctly. We do not ambush. We file the formal documentation with the court that afternoon before the event, so it is already on the public record when we walk in. We bring representation. We have the codicil authenticated on site by Harold personally. I know how to do this, I said quietly. I know you do. A brief silence. I'll clear my calendar for the 14th. I called Harold Chen that evening. He picked up on the second ring. Mr. Chen, I said, I have a favor to ask. I've been waiting for you to ask it, he said. The night of the gala, I wore my father's favorite color on me. A deep navy dress, fitted, understated, the kind of thing he would have called appropriate without making it sound like a compliment. I drove down from Hartford alone and arrived at the Delamar 20 minutes after the reception began, when the room was full enough that my entrance would not be the first thing anyone noticed. The ballroom was everything it had always been: round tables with white linens, candlelight on the water glasses, the low hum of 200 people performing graciousness at each other. The literacy coalitions hung across the back wall. A small stage had been set up at the front, a podium with a microphone, a table bearing 2 crystal awards. I stood at the entrance for a moment and looked at the room my father had built, the room full of people who had respected him, and I thought, he would have hated this part, the theater of it. He was not a theatrical man, but he had known when he sat across from Harold Chen and pressed his pen too hard into those 4 pages that it might come to this, that the door he was building might have to be opened in a room full of people. Pat was already inside, near the back, in a charcoal blazer, her legal bag over her shoulder. Arthur Kemp and Donald Sato, my father's witnesses, men in their late 60s in dark suits, were at a table near the side wall. Harold Chen stood quietly near the entrance to the hallway, his notarial journal under his arm, looking exactly like what he was. A man who had been waiting patiently for the right moment to do something that needed doing. I had filed the formal petition with the probate court at 3 o'clock that afternoon. It was already on the public record. The codicil was already submitted. What was happening tonight was not a legal proceeding, it was a factual one. A matter of who knew what and when, witnessed by the people who had known my father best. I found my table. I sat. I accepted a glass of water from a passing server and set it in front of me without drinking it. Diane saw me from across the room at approximately the same moment I sat down. I watched her register my presence. A stillness that moved through her like a current, there and gone in 2 seconds. She said something to the woman beside her without taking her eyes off me. Then she looked away. Cassie was at the head table, near the stage. She did not look at me at all, which told me she had been told I might come. The program began at 8. There were remarks from the coalition director, a brief video about the foundation's work over 19 years, a donation announcement. Then the coalition chair took the podium to present the Legacy Award. He spoke about my father for 4 minutes. He spoke about Robert Lawson's belief that literacy was the foundation of dignity, that a person who could read could navigate the world on their own terms, that no amount of money or social position substituted for the basic competence of understanding what was written in front of you. He said, my father had built this foundation the same way he built everything, quietly, carefully, without needing credit for it. I looked at the table in front of me, then the chair said, and now, to accept the Lawson Family Legacy Award on behalf of Robert Lawson's legacy, his wife, Diane, and his daughter, Cassandra. Diane rose. Cassie rose beside her. They walked to the stage together in the particular way of women who have rehearsed an entrance. The applause was warm and genuine. These were people who had loved my father, who were expressing it through the only available channel. Diane stepped to the microphone. She thanked the coalition. She thanked the guests. She spoke about my father with fluency and grace, the ease of a woman who had spent 40 years perfecting the performance of their marriage for public consumption. She said he had been a man of integrity, of principle, of deep commitment to family. She said the word family 3 times. I stood up, not loudly, not dramatically. I simply rose from my chair and walked toward the stage, and because I was tall and the room was well lit, and because something in my bearing communicated purpose rather than disruption, people stepped aside without being asked. I was aware of Pat moving along the side wall. I was aware of Harold Chen walking quietly through the ballroom entrance behind me. Diane saw me coming when I was 6 tables away. The microphone picked up the small intake of breath she took before she controlled it. I did not rush. I reached the base of the stage and stopped. I did not climb the steps. I did not need to. I turned to face the room. 200 people, candlelight, the banner with my father's foundation's name across it, and I said, at a volume that carried clearly without requiring me to raise my voice, I'm sorry to interrupt. My name is Jenna Lawson. Robert Lawson was my father. And there is something this room should know. Harold Chen stepped up beside me. He opened his notarial journal to the marked page, the way a man opens a book he has been carrying for a long time, waiting to read from it. The room was completely silent, not the polite quiet of an audience waiting for a speaker. The specific, charged silence of 200 people understanding simultaneously that something real is happening. Diane had not moved from the microphone. Her hands were at her sides. The crystal award was on the table behind her, catching the light. Cassie, beside her, had gone the color of the white tablecloths. I said clearly, for the record, for the room, for every person who had known and respected Robert Lawson, 6 months before my father died, he executed a legal codicil to his will. It was properly witnessed and notarized. It was deliberately excluded from his probate proceedings. I paused. Mr. Harold Chen. The notary who executed that document is here tonight. The document has been filed with the Connecticut Probate Court as of 3 o'clock this afternoon. Harold held up the journal. He did not speak. He did not need to. The coalition chair had stepped back from the podium. He was looking at Harold with the expression of a man rapidly reassessing an evening he had thought he understood. Someone at a table near the back said, quietly but audibly, "Oh my God." I looked at Diane. She was looking back at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not anger, not grief, but the particular blankness of a person who has just watched the structure they built collapse inward, slowly, from the center, exactly the way they always feared it would. She did not say anything, neither did I. I had said what needed saying, in front of the people who needed to hear it, on the record, in a room full of my father's witnesses. I turned and walked back through the silent ballroom, and this time no one stepped aside because no one was in my way. The silence lasted approximately 4 seconds after I walked away from the stage, then it broke. Not into chaos, but into the low, urgent murmur of 200 people, turning to the person beside them and saying, in varying registers of disbelief and recognition, the thing that had just become undeniable. I heard it rising behind me as I walked toward the back of the ballroom. Fragments of conversation. Someone saying Gerald's name, someone else saying codicil in the careful tone of a person tasting an unfamiliar word, a woman near the window saying, loudly enough that I caught it clearly, Robert always said he had things arranged. He always said that. Pat materialized at my elbow before I reached the back wall. She did not touch my arm or say anything immediately. She simply fell into step beside me. The way a second chair moves in a courtroom, and I was grateful for it. How are you? She said quietly. Fine, I said. Completely fine. She looked at me sideways and did not argue with that. We stopped near the hallway entrance. From there, I could see the stage clearly. The coalition chair had stepped back to the podium and was speaking in a low voice to a man I recognized as the hotel's event manager. The procedural instinct of someone trying to determine whether the evening had a next step or whether it was simply over. Cassie had not moved from the stage. She was standing very still in the way of someone who has lost the ability to calculate what a normal posture looks like. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was open in a way I had never seen from her. Not the performed openness of someone working a room, but the raw, unguarded look of a person standing at the edge of something they cannot take back. Deanne had stepped away from the microphone. She had not stepped off the stage. She stood at the center of it, the crystal award on the table behind her, 200 people, watching her from the candlelit dark below, and she looked, for the first and only time in my memory, small, not physically. She was still immaculately dressed, still perfectly composed in posture. But something beneath the surface of her had shifted, the way a building shifts when the foundation moves, not visible yet from the outside but legible to anyone paying attention. I was paying attention. It took about 90 seconds. Gerald Fitch was at a table near the front. I had not seen him when I came in, had not looked for him, but I saw him now. He was standing beside his chair with his phone in his hand, already making a call, his back half turned to the room. He was wearing black tie the way men who are uncomfortable in black tie wear it, correctly but stiffly like a costume. His outside counsel was not present. This was a social event, not a legal proceeding, and Gerald had come tonight as a family friend and long-standing foundation donor. The role he had played for 20 years, that role had just changed. The man Gerald was calling did not answer, apparently, because I watched him lower the phone and stand there for a moment with the particular stillness of someone who has just run through their list of options and found it shorter than expected. Then he looked across the room and found me. I held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds. Then I looked away. Harold Chen had positioned himself near the coalition's administrative table, his notarial journal open, speaking quietly with 2 board members who had approached him. He was explaining something with the patient, precise manner of a man who has been explaining careful things to careful people for 30 years. One of the board members was taking notes. Then Diane came off the stage. She did not walk toward me. She walked toward Gerald, cutting a line through the room with the direct, contained movement of someone who has decided that the next 60 seconds require precision. I watched her reach him. I watched her say something, short and low. Gerald shook his head. Diane said something else. Gerald's hand came up, not aggressive, just the gesture of a man indicating that something was beyond his current control, which was both true and, at this particular moment, the worst possible thing he could communicate to her. Diane's posture changed. It was not dramatic. She did not raise her voice. She did not gesture. But something in the line of her shoulders shifted, and the hand she had at her side closed briefly into something that was not quite a fist and then released. And I understood, watching it from 40 feet away in a candlelit ballroom, that she had just fully grasped, in real time, the distance between where she had believed she was standing and where she actually stood. It was Cassie who broke. She came off the stage on the side, away from the podium, and walked quickly toward the hallway on the opposite end of the ballroom. Not toward me, not toward Diane, just away, with the focused speed of someone who needs to not be seen for a moment. She passed within 20 feet of me without looking in my direction. Her face was very still and very pale, and her eyes were the eyes of someone doing the internal mathematics of what had just happened and arriving, repeatedly, at a number that did not work. She pushed through the hallway door. 3 minutes later, a hotel staff member came through the same door and spoke quietly to the event manager. He nodded, spoke into his earpiece, and crossed the room to where the coalition chair was standing. I watched the chair's expression shift, a quick, professional adjustment, and then he stepped back toward the podium and said, in the measured tone of a man who has run many events and knows how to redirect one, "Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief intermission. Please enjoy the dessert service." The lights brightened slightly. The room began to move. Pat touched my arm. "The detective is here," she said. I turned. Near the main entrance, speaking with the hotel's head of security, were two men in dark suits who had the specific quality of people who are not guests. One of them caught Pat's eye and gave a brief, neutral nod. This was not Sergeant Millis from the Greenwich Police Department, who had left me a voicemail about a civil matter 2 months ago. These were investigators from the Connecticut State Attorney's Office, who had been notified 3 weeks earlier, by Pat, through proper channels, that a probate fraud case was developing in Fairfield County and that a public event might serve as the appropriate moment to formally serve notice of the investigation. They were not here to arrest anyone tonight. That is not how these things work, and I had never suggested it should be. They were here to serve Gerald Fitch with formal notice of an investigative inquiry into the conduct of his fiduciary duties, and to ensure that the evening's events were documented by someone with official standing. Gerald saw them before they reached him. I know this because I was watching his face when he looked toward the entrance, and I saw the specific expression of a man who has been practicing law for 30 years and understands immediately what two men in dark suits near the door of a social event means for him personally. He sat down. Not collapsed. Gerald was too controlled for that. He simply sat down in the nearest chair, his phone still in his hand, and looked at the tablecloth in front of him with the expression of a man reviewing, at speed, every decision that had led him to this particular chair, in this particular room, on this particular evening. His outside counsel was going to receive a call tonight that no attorney enjoys receiving from a client. Pat guided me gently toward a side table and we sat. She set her legal bag between her feet. Around us, the room would be moving into smaller, quieter clusters. People who had come tonight to honor my father's memory and were now processing something unexpected, something that would be discussed in Greenwich for years. I picked up a water glass from the table and drank from it. My hands were steady. Across the room, Diane stood alone near the stage. The people who had been around her all evening had redistributed themselves, the way people redistribute themselves when proximity becomes complicated. She was still composed. She would probably remain composed for a very long time. That was who she was. The architecture of her ran too deep to collapse in a single evening. But she was alone in a way I had never seen her be in a public room, in a life built entirely around never being alone in a public room. The Crystal Award was still on the table behind the empty podium. Nobody had picked it up. Pat leaned toward me. "The investigators will want a brief statement tonight, just confirming the timeline of the filing. 20 minutes, in one of the hotel's private rooms. Are you ready?" "Yes," I said. "Then we go." I stood. I straightened my navy dress. I thought, briefly, about my father, about the Sunday calls, about the careful pressing of his pen, about 11 words on a folded piece of paper that had found their way to me through a quiet man in a small office above an insurance agency in Westport. He had built a door and trusted me to walk through it. I had walked through it, in the end, in the right room, in front of the right people, exactly the way a careful man plans things, when he has run out of time but not out of love. I followed Pat toward the private room. Behind me, the ballroom of the Delamar Hotel hummed with the particular sound of a story that had just changed direction permanently, 200 witnesses to the moment it turned. The probate hearing was held on a Thursday in late March, in a courtroom on the second floor of the Stamford Superior Court. It was not dramatic in the way courtroom scenes are dramatic in films. No raised voices, no sudden confessions, no moments where the gallery erupted. Probate proceedings rarely are. They are, at their core, administrative exercises, a judge reviewing documents, hearing arguments, and applying the law to the facts in front of them. The drama, when it exists, lives in the documents, in the dates and signatures and notarial seals. In the space between what was filed and what was withheld, Judge Patricia Morales had been on the probate bench in Fairfield County for 14 years. She was small, precise, and moved through proceedings with the efficiency of someone who has seen every version of a family destroying itself over money and has long since stopped being surprised by it. She reviewed the codicil, Harold Chen's notarial journal, the witness affidavits, and the release document with its buried codicil language in the unhurried way of someone reading things she intends to remember. Gerald Fitch was not present. His outside counsel appeared on his behalf and filed a motion at the outset, requesting a continuance on the grounds that Gerald was under active investigation by the state attorney's office, and that his participation in the probate proceeding could implicate his Fifth Amendment rights. Judge Morales granted the continuance of Gerald's personal testimony and proceeded with the documentary record. It took 4 hours. At the end of those 4 hours, Judge Morales set down her pen, removed her reading glasses, and said the following, in the flat, careful language of a jurist who chooses words with surgical precision. The codicil executed by Robert Arthur Lawson was valid, properly witnessed, properly notarized, and legally controlling over any conflict provisions in the primary will. The certificate of diligent search, filed by Gerald Fitch, was, in the court's finding, materially false. The release document presented to Jennifer Lawson contained language that demonstrated advanced knowledge of the codicil's existence, knowledge that had not been disclosed during probate administration. She referred the matter formally to the state attorney's office for further proceedings. Then she signed the order. The investment trust, all $4. $2 million, was restructured per the codicil's terms. 50% to me, 50% to Cassie, with the corporate fiduciary in Stamford named as trustee. The Round Hill Road property transferred to me outright. Diane's lifetime interest, granted under the primary will, was voided by the codicil's specific provisions. I sat at the plaintiff's table and listened to all of this with my hands flat on the surface in front of me, and I did not cry. Not because I was not moved. I was deeply. In the specific way you are moved when something you believed about a person is confirmed publicly and permanently. But because I had learned, over months of doing this work, that the moment of legal victory is almost always quieter than the months that led to it. The drama is in the preparation. The hearing is just the accounting. Pat shook my hand afterward in the courthouse hallway. She is not a demonstrative person, and neither am I, so it was brief and sufficient. Your father would be satisfied, she said. He would find the whole thing excessive, I said. He would have preferred a 2-paragraph letter. She smiled. Probably. Gerald Fitch surrendered his law license in Connecticut 4 months after the hearing, as part of a negotiated resolution with the state attorney's office that included a formal finding of fiduciary misconduct and fraud on the court. His firm dissolved by midsummer. The 2 men with legal pads who had sat against the wall at the probate reading were paralegal staff from his office, both of whom provided cooperation statements to investigators in exchange for reduced exposure. Their statements confirmed that Gerald had been aware of the codicil's likely existence as early as 8 months before my father's death. Having been informed by Diane after she discovered a reference to Harold Chen's contact information in my father's personal files, Diane did not face criminal charges. The state attorney's office determined that her conduct, while deeply problematic, fell short of the criminal threshold without Gerald's direct testimony, which he declined to provide. She retained her personal assets, her own accounts, her car, her jewelry, but lost the Round Hill Roadhouse and her co-trustee status. She moved to a condo in Darien. I have not spoken to her since the night of the gala. Cassie cooperated. I do not say this with satisfaction, exactly. What I feel about Cassie is something more complicated than satisfaction. It is the specific sadness of understanding that a person can be complicit in something harmful without fully understanding the machinery of it until it is too late. She had known, in the general way of someone who benefits from not asking questions, that the estate had been structured to exclude me. She had not known the specific legal fraud Gerald had committed. When she understood the distinction, sitting across from her own attorney in a New Haven office, looking at the transcript of the conversation she'd had with me in January, she made the decision to cooperate with investigators. Her share of the trust was reduced by 30% as part of the civil settlement, the amount representing her unjust enrichment from the period of the fraudulent administration. She paid it without contesting. The last I heard, she was living in Boston, working in nonprofit development. Miriam told me she had stopped posting on social media. I do not wish Cassie harm. I did not build this case out of anger at her. What I built it out of was fidelity to the document my father had created, to the careful, loving architecture of what he had tried to do, to the 11 words on a folded piece of paper that had asked me to trust him one more time. I took possession of the Round Hill Roadhouse in April, on a gray morning with the hydrangeas just starting to push up their new growth along the front walk. I had brought nothing with me. No boxes, no furniture, no plan for what to do with 4 acres and 11 bedrooms and a circular driveway that still held the particular smell of every season of my childhood. I just walked through each room slowly, the way you walk through a place where someone you loved used to be, looking for what remains. In my father's study, on the bottom shelf of the built-in bookcase behind his desk, I found a copy of the codicil. His own copy, printed on plain paper, unfolded, held in place with a single binder clip. On the top corner, in his handwriting, he had written one word, Jenna. Just that, just my name. The way you write a name on something you intend for a specific person and no one else. I stood in his study for a long time, holding that piece of paper. 14 months after the probate hearing, I opened the Lawson Legal Group on State Street in Hartford, an estate planning and probate litigation practice with 4 attorneys, a paralegal, and a client intake coordinator named Marcus who makes very good coffee and knows every client's name before they sit down. The firm name was Pat's suggestion, offered lightly, the way she offers most things. I had not considered using my father's name. When she said it, I understood immediately that I had been waiting for someone to suggest it. On the wall behind the reception desk, framed in simple dark wood, is the original letter Harold Chen forwarded to me. The one containing my father's 11 words. Harold came to the opening. He brought his notarial journal, which I thought was charming, and stayed for 2 hours, talking to clients and colleagues, with the quiet warmth of a man who has done something he is proud of. I gave him a copy of the codicil, fully executed and court-certified for his records. He said he already had one, of course he did, at the Foundation Gala the following February, the 20th annual, the first one back at the Delamar since the previous year. I was named to the board of the Greenwich Literacy Coalition. The chair, in his remarks, said that Robert Lawson had always believed the foundation should be led by people who understood what it meant to navigate the world on your own terms. He looked at me when he said it. I accepted quietly. My father would have found the applause excessive, but he would have been satisfied. I know that there is something I want to tell you before I go, something I did not fully understand until I was standing in my father's study with his handwritten copy of the codicil, looking at my name in his handwriting. He did not leave me money in secret. He did not hide a fortune. What he left me was a set of conditions designed to activate the thing I had already built. My knowledge, my training, my ability to read what was written and hear what was meant. He trusted that I would find Harold Chen. He trusted that I would read the release document and notice the buried language. He trusted that when the moment came, I would not sign away something that was already mine. He knew who I was, even when no one else in that family bothered to look. You cannot put a number on that. You cannot put it in a trust or transfer it by deed. It is not the kind of thing that shows up in probate court, but it is, I have come to believe, the only inheritance that matters. If this story reached you today, if you have ever been told you were the difficult one, The ungrateful one, the one who left and therefore deserved less. I want you to hear this. The people who underestimate you are counting on you to agree with their assessment. Don't know what you know. Read what is in front of you. Do not sign anything until you understand exactly what you are signing away. And if someone who loved you once left you a door, find it. Walk through it. They built it for you specifically. Leave me a comment and tell me what part of this story stayed with you. If you believe that quiet persistence is more powerful than loud demands, hit like and subscribe. There are more stories like this one. I will see you in the next one.